Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's our pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck. It's always good to hear your wisdom. And there are many things we've discussed, and maybe tonight we can talk about war. It's a good subject, and more particularly the war in the Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine, and maybe make some kind of observations about what war does for control, as to how the government can control you as a person and how war facilitates that process. So I'll just bring that out there. How does the Bill of Rights work in the United States in the face of war? Does it crack up?
Well, are you talking about from a textual point of view, or are you talking about based on our historical lived experience? Because that's a very totally different thing.
Yes. And so the government abridges, rather routinely, abridges rights just because they have to. Mm-hmm. They think their nation is threatened, and these protections of liberty go away. Can you think of times that's happened?
Oh yes, many occasions. Some of the most, probably the two greatest examples would be the Civil War, which really is as close to an existential crisis as the country ever had, because had that war gone the other way, the United States would have quite literally ceased to exist, and it was a near run thing.
It might have been broken up several more times too.
Yes,
one breakup may bring the justification for that was if we want to change things, we can. So there would be no intellectual argument.
Yes.
If anybody Georgia wanted to break away, Bibb County, whatever, it might have just kept going. Yes.
Well, it happened. It even happened within the Confederacy. Certain counties within the Confederacy tried to
withdrew. Yes.
Yes. You saw some of this taking place during World War I, and rather more taking place during World War II. I wouldn't say that either one of those was an existential crisis on the same scale as the Civil War. And the Civil War also had an additional situation in that the Constitution does contemplate a war with enemy sovereigns, with foreign countries. It does not contemplate an internal civil war. And so that really opened a kettle of fish that caused a lot of troubles. I think we were probably in a greater danger in World War II than we were in World War I, and our involvement in World War II was a lot longer. It was more like 4 years as opposed to a year and a half. So yes, in all of those, you did see economic rights severely curtailed. You saw civil liberties severely curtailed, and it's really kind of surprising that after each one of those wars, the ship got righted, and pretty quickly as well, although the Cold War that followed hard on the heels of World War II produced, in my view, a very long-term and so far irreversible degrading of our civil liberties.
Well, on that point, I'll spring to the next point that we might discuss, is when war happens, it gives the government a lot of authority that people accept. They've got this authority, and the word treason is tossed in there, so the government can accuse you of treason. And additionally, I think we've discussed the human brain, but if you're a group, I'm a part of this group, you might say, and my group is under attack, well, I want my group to prevail, and the government attempts to put everyone in that group, and if you, for whatever you're a conscientious objector, or there's some other reason that makes you not go with the group, that's a difficult situation. And so the government, if you're a dictator or you have pretensions in that direction, war, a relatively limited one, shall I say, not one that's going to take you out of the seat of power, it often makes your position more secure, and you can wrap yourself in the flag. Your proponents can do that, and your power becomes somewhat unassailable. And having said that, one thing that happens is the information that's findable disappears. So if you're looking, I don't know, you're trying to see how well the bombing campaign is going in Germany, or what if you could say that, but may not too much may appear, and there won't be pictures of children that have had their decapitated. There won't be, well, the U.S. bombed whatever, and that number of people died. Particularly, I think so, in the firebombing raids in Japan. So the information is just not available. Any mistakes the government makes, any bad things it does, it just is not talked about. And you could say the American citizens, the Japanese citizens that were tossed into pretty nice concentration camps as concentration camps go. I mean, they had indoor toilets, I think. They had some heat and they got some food, but it was a pretty unpleasant experience for American citizens. So, and no one is in those circumstances is going to go against the government line. And it's particularly a problem, I think, in a democratic system, which is something we all need to think about. So if you're a voter and you're going to cast your vote in a particular way, and you depend on information that comes to you about the facts of the case, so to speak, and if the government is controlling pretty much all the information, that causes a big problem. In the U.S., it's another whole story, but polarized opinions are sought. Many people seek a polarized opinion because it's gratifying to their own worldview. But having said thinking of those little things, maybe I can direct the conversation toward the war in the Ukraine. And along those lines, how does Putin play things out in the classic dictator story here?
Well, we probably need the other Dr. Melton in for this because
Yes.
she's much better at Russia than I am. I want to back up, though, before I do have an answer for that.
I went around the track a lot here. Yes.
I do want to back up, though. I happen to have on good authority that you've just recently finished reading a biography of Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, yes, that's
so I'm
right.
sure that
Yes.
the Committee on Public Information probably rings a bell
Yes,
for you having read that.
Right, yes.
And I want to extend on that a little bit. That who is the ultimate boss in America? The ultimate boss in America is, or at least is theoretically is supposed to be, the registered voter. And so if you've got a Committee on Public Information or White House press briefings or 4 o'clock follies being held in Saigon, and you have the employees,
Yes.
i.e. the President, the Congress, the
Right,
Pentagon,
right.
systematically lying to the
Right,
boss
right,
in
yes.
order to keep their job
Yes.
and to have their way. I mean, that's the fundamental problem that we're looking at here. But anyway, yeah, you asked about Putin. He is banging on a drum that goes way back in Russian history. Well, not way back, but certainly at least a century. This is a campaign to rid Europe of Nazism.
Yes.
Because Zelensky's a Nazi. He's
He's a Jewish Nazi.
He's a Jewish Nazi. He's got these Nazi thugs down there in Crimea,
Right.
and that still rings a bell with Russians today. We here in America have no concept of how the Russian people suffered in World War II. We have never in this country, mercifully, thankfully, experienced anything like what they went through. We lost in World War II. Let's get worse than that. The worst war we ever had in our country in terms of loss of life was our Civil War.
Yes.
Maybe 500,000 dead, another
Yes.
500,000 wounded, total of 1 million.
Out of 30 million people.
Yeah, out of 30 million people. That was worse than our losses in World War II. In World War II, the Soviets lost, we can't count that high, 20 million at a
Yes.
minimum.
Yes.
At a minimum.
Right.
Some estimates run as high as 50 million.
Right.
So when you tap into, we are going up against the Nazis again, that
Right.
taps into something very deep. Now, how well has that unified the Russian people? I don't know.
Well,
I don't think as well as it
Let me
was designed
hasten to add to this litany of hell that the Ukrainian famine in the 1930s killed millions of people.
Yes.
So the Ukrainians have this and many Eastern Europeans.
And Stalin was doing that to them.
That's right. So Russian, you could say, Russia did this also. The substantial part of the Ukraine was really part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All these issues. The Turks were in the Crimea, you name it. So lots of issues there. But one other, maybe we could play this game for a little bit. I'm setting Putin up as a bad guy, et cetera, and obviously he is. And he's the classic dynamics about the benefit that a leader has when he takes his nation into war, shall I say a successful war. There's a lot to be said for that, and the controls that have to take place, et cetera. But is there an argument that that Russia has in regards to the Ukraine? I mean, the language is similar, and apparently, I don't know all the details about this, but there was maybe in 2014 there were a Russian supporters were summarily destroyed by the Ukrainians, and so the war that took place in 2014, provoked by Russia in many ways, it was bad. The Russians would say really the Ukrainians want to be part of Russia. They want to be part. There are people. We've been together more or less under one leader for centuries. We speak the same language. We look like the same people. The religion is closely connected. The Ukrainians brought us, I guess, Orthodox Christianity, and our relationships go back and forth. We fought these great wars. And so we really have we're comrades. And the idea that someone would be under the corrupt influence of the West and would basically sort of sever this part of our peoplehood.
I just got to jump in. This is sounding more and more like the Anschluss with every sentence you utter.
Well, possibly, but
yes.
I mean, what I'm saying is that these are arguments that it would be interesting. I don't know if we hear it particularly, but I think it would be very useful if you heard whatever the Russian defense is. When I was trying to produce one for them.
Yes.
But I'm sure there is a defense that's there.
Well,
and then having said that, that's possibly even a rational defense. Then you get into the issues about the subterfuge that's been out there, and a lot of the corrupt, the wrongful, I guess, assessment of geopolitics that are being offered to the Russian people. So there's kind of a kernel of something that you mentioned, the suffering and the war and trying to turn the Western people into Nazis, but maybe it's more than that. It's a deep-seated sense of concern and paranoia, and of trying to, from a geopolitical point of view. I've talked about this before. You ride on the Eurasian steppes there. There are only about 140 million Russians, and their population is half of the country at the height of the Soviet Union. All the parts of it have left. And without the Ukraine in the hopper, it is very difficult to maintain the national borders out there against any firm enemy. You could say China, you could say the Islamic people. And so their geopolitical situation is fragile, particularly in a world with criminal nations against them. Now, if the world is a peaceful place, things would be okay, and that would be but they don't, at least the leadership, could not back away from the intoxication of destroying the Nazi terror regime, which they did. I mean, we just give the Russians substantial credit. They
certainly did the lion's share of the fighting.
I don't think they could have done it without Western supplies. They could not have done it. And so the number of tanks that were destroyed, straight away, the Russians lost everything. Everything blew up, and the U.S. and particularly Britain gave them everything they had.
I know many Russians who will deny that to this day.
Really?
And I think one reason is that Stalin would be getting this material and he'd be tearing the "Made in USA" signs off them and stamping "Made in wherever.
There's pretty
So-
good evidence that the
There is. There is.
that it's a whole nother story about what Stalin's war. It's pretty interesting if it's probed about how Stalin maybe encouraged Japan to attack the U.S. May have been doing something like that, and certainly Japan and the Soviet Union had some kind of deal, which hasn't particularly been discussed much, about why don't you guys fight the U.S. and do whatever you'd like, and we're going to get the supplies that are coming to us. As a matter of fact, interestingly, in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese, our cargo ships were allowed by the Japanese to pass through to the Russian Pacific ports. They were, U.S. flag rolling along there.
I was not aware of that.
That's.
Now
that's
certainly
all.
the Japanese would not molest Russian flagships.
No, I believe these were American. Maybe I'm overstating.
I don't.
I could be.
No, remember, Russia and Japan were not at war until August of 1945.
I know, they were
so,
never
yeah.
at war, but the ships that came through, the Japanese certainly allowed all those ships without any problems, and I think there was a wink-wink deal. And U.S. flagships, it could be there was a U.S. owned ship. It could be pursued.
I'll need to check up on that.
Certainly, there's a lot of argument about the Russian pushing Japan as best they could to attack the U.S. and thinking that was pretty good. Going south was a big deal, and not being and encouraging it, I guess you'd say, which would make sense.
Well, I look forward to you supplying me with some information on that.
I'll see what I can do. Actually, I'll try and look that up. I mean, there's a pretty interesting.
Yes. But anyway, yes, the Russians have always been open to attack and invasion, both from Western Europe, from the steppes. That's made them paranoid. It's not paranoia if they're really out to get you.
And I think you could say the West is they put this big deal together. They're 450 million Europeans all together, plus the U.S. is there. So you have maybe 700 million people with the world's best technology right on their border, and they're trying to chip away the different parts of Russia. And the Baltic provinces were strongly desired by the Moscow, and when they broke away, that was tough on them.
Well, I think you've got several things going on, and I think this is where psychohistory comes in. That it's a mishmash of things. That they want those buffer states for security. Napoleon, Hitler, you name it. They are feeling the sting of having. They are losing their great power status. You've got a man in power who was part of that regime that dissolved, and I think that's done something to him mentally. He wants the glory days back, and he wants to expand, and you've got NATO, which, and maybe this is 2020 hindsight, but it really probably should have been disbanded when the Berlin Wall fell. It had served its purpose, and instead it starts encroaching in what people like Putin have regarded, rightly or wrongly, as their backyard. And that has provoked a response. And it's not like Putin has been lying about what his plans were. He has been saying for 20 years, we're not going to put up with this. And then when he suddenly launches this invasion, the entire West is stunned that he's done it. Well, why? He said he was going to do this, and once again, another Hitler parallel. I mean, Hitler laid out his entire game plan in Mein Kampf, and yet the Allies just put their head in the sand and couldn't believe it when Hitler actually started doing it. So.
It would be interesting, I mean, to actually hear the Russian, I mean, we don't hear it, do we? The Russian view, an intelligent person, can come up with some reasons this happened or whatever. I mean, we try to do something, but not as well as a real knowledgeable Russian could. And our our media doesn't easily let that happen. I don't think I've heard.
Well,
I mean, maybe there's some it's happened. I don't.
It is easier to read Pravda today than it ever has been in the past. I can plug you into Pravda on my cell phone if you're interested.
Occasionally, I've seen the Russian. I found it not persuasive and actually quite wrongful.
Well,
but there must be somebody that's not. At least that was my opinion.
The Russia Times,
as neutral as I could be.
Yes, but my point being, you said we need to read we have trouble learning the Russian perspective. My response is, well, of course, you may not like it, but you can certainly read it.
No, as a matter of fact, it seems to be so wrong-footed that it just doesn't work for me personally.
Yes.
But maybe there's a way that it seems to me a lot of what we're seeing is just pure propaganda, wrongfully collected facts, and not a sophisticated person discussing the Russian style. And I'll make one comment that pops into my mind is the war in Yugoslavia, particularly in Serbia. And so maybe in some ways the Russians understand this the way that Westerners cannot. And that is that you have these competing ethnic groups. And if you're a big, strong ethnic group, you need to punch around the little ethnic group. Rightfully or wrongly, you just need to do that. If you let yourself become too supine, they'll gang up on you and do something worse to you. So the big dog, and now
we've gone back from World War II to World War I, and Austrians beating up on the Serbs.
Well, that's now. So what happened in the which people can't recollect, the Serbian conflict, Serbia's, and they have their historic. Relationship with Russia, and indeed World War I, you could say, happened because of the
Pan-Slavism.
Right, yeah. That's correct. And so these are people. I tried to say that in this ideal, that certainly the Ukraine would be the prime example of that. And if those bonds break, it's injurious to a particular viewpoint. And in the breakup of Yugoslavia, the Serbs were the dominant group of people there, and they had, I think in Kosovo, they had a long-standing claim to that land, which was one of their, I think, a Serbian province. And they also had different claims, and these other ethnic groups ganged up on them. And I think the Russians would say, well, we're going to blow, these are our enemies, we'll blow them up, or they'll kill us if we don't kill them first. And the West took the side of the Croatians and the Kosovoians and the Macedonians, and they really kicked the hell out, if I could say that word once again, out of a small, I won't say defenseless country, but a very small country with maybe 10 million people in it, with their own claims to nationhood and their own statements that are not uncommon European statements, saying that's Alsace-Lorraine is actually ours, or back and forth. But this is our land. 600 years ago, this happened to us, and now it's been taken from us by everyone's ganged up on us, and to do this. And the Russians who defended this land in 1914, it caused this terrible world upheaval, but they did it, and they were too powerless to do anything when this happened again to their Serbian brothers. And so that must have had a very negative impact. It must have. And and right now Serbia is supporting the Russians as best they can. They're in the middle of Europe. They're trying to do that. So these stories, there are some stories out there that are good, that have some merit. You could extract some merit from them. But in the totality of decisions and events, they don't count for enough, if I can phrase it that way. There are some statements. So when you finally weigh the argument, the Russian argument, I don't think it comes up as enough. At the end, maybe you could understand what's going on and try and assuage their paranoia. I mean, if we have a world where we can diminish the the concern over that, and stop preventive war. Isn't this a classic example of a preventive, at least the Russians are saying, they were going to attack us, and we beat them to it and attack them?
Ever since the UN Charter was founded, actually going back before the UN Charter, going back to the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the idea of aggressive war has been denounced as being contrary to international law. So I would imagine if you look at everything, at every war since the 1920s that has been started, the initiator has claimed we're doing this as a preventative war because they've got it in for us.
Yes.
I mean, even Hitler and Poland did that. Operation Himmler. They send in Polish dress troops to. I mean, this. So yeah, they're going to say that, but
So every aggressor nation. Maybe that's my point. And
nobody's an aggressor nation. We're all acting in self-defense.
Somebody, yes, and so particularly the facts are out there. It's hard to say. I want a more luxurious summer retreat, and you've got a nice beach there, and I'll just send some troopers in, and we'll take it over.
Yeah, aggressive war is it's certainly against international law, but it's also bad PR.
But isn't that what happened here? In other words, the justification that's basically out there is I've tried to make whatever their case is. Well, maybe the Serbians were injured, and maybe the 2014 war wasn't fair, and then maybe these are really our people, and there's some kind of subversion going on. And maybe the fourth argument might be the corruption of basically good people by terrible Western values. And it's true if you look at, I don't know, gay rights or whatever the deal is there. I think they're quite restricted in Russia, and there are a lot of things that people would say were out there in the West would not be present in Russia. And the idea is the Ukraine is going that way morally, and so the argument is we have to save these. We can't let these good Orthodox Serbian Christians be injured by the terrible Western propaganda. Maybe that's some of it. But and then throwing the whole picture is it's an indication of some kind of profound human failing for our species that something like this has happened. I mean, it shouldn't, and I think this is an important thing I'd like to say, is that we can't necessarily castigate the Putin alone, and that's our normal tendency. Why did this, and maybe you've heard this, everything would be fine if somebody could just kill Putin. If they just shot Putin, and then that's how evil appears in the world, is that there's an evil person that somehow captures power, and if we shoot that person, everything is going to be okay. But it could well be a worse person appears, and the intrinsic...
There's an inertia. There's a huge inertia.
Yes, and problems with nation states. That's an issue. I mean, can we somehow get past these terrible events? War is a terrible event. And we imagined, I mean, I can remember after the Soviet Union blew up, the New World Order is here. Everything is over with. All human conflict is ended. We're all going to have a Western democratic capitalist system has won, and everyone is going to sup at the table and be friends and buddies everywhere. And intrinsically, it's easy to find nice fellow creatures anywhere. I mean, anywhere you can find a nice person you would like in any country, any place. And we can all be just friends, and it doesn't seem to have worked. And one reason it may not have worked, just to continue on this, is maybe I've discussed this, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So one of the things that shouldn't be neglected is the vulnerability of our species to plague, and the chances of these plagues taking place and overturning our civilization. And it could be there's a relationship. Do you have any thoughts about that? as we're concluding
Yeah,
here?
just my
I
main
threw a
thought
lot
is-
out there.
Yeah,
yes.
that's hard to unwrap, but I would say that since the dawn of the industrial age, the means of war now dwarf the ends. And as long as you have Neanderthal brains that cannot come to terms with that, the fate of humanity lies in the balance.
Well, okay, on that note, Bucky, it's good to have you with us
Indeed.
once again.
Thanks.
Forward march. Go in peace.
Indeed.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.